Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog Season 2, Episode 19, and I am filming this at Riot Games in one of the fancy rooms. And yeah, it is Wednesday morning, so hopefully I can get this video out to you on Wednesday. Otherwise, there won't be a Wednesday video. But yesterday, I ended up being a little too busy in Futureland, so I didn't get a chance to record. So I'm doing this bright and early, which is why I'm doing this inside right now. It's very dark outside. But figured I would try to record a video, answer some questions, and talk about TFT. Today is Wednesday, so that means the patch notes come out today. As far as I know, there's only like one or two differences from the patch rundown that barely affect balance. I'll tweet about those once those are confirmed, but otherwise nothing should be crazy. I know the patch comes out Thursday. I know some people have been scrimming already. There's rumors that Aurelion Soul is really, really strong. So we'll see how those go. Obviously, you can never tell too early with scrims. Sometimes people jump to conclusions or overanalyze, but we'll see. I know the live team will take a look at things and handle it and see what they can do, but yeah. Otherwise, I've been, like I said, working in Futureland, and Futureland's always an interesting place. There's always so much to do, and TFT is the train that just keeps moving. So the good news is Set 16 has been a big win, and so when you win big, sometimes expectations just keep growing, So that's kind of our life right now. But yeah, it's been good. It's been a good trip so far. I can't say I've been sleeping that well, but that is what it is. That's just normal, being away from home, things like that. So now, because I'm not in my office and I don't have all your questions up on a computer monitor, we're going old school. I've got a piece of paper here, which I wrote down some of the questions you guys have asked, and I will do my best. All right, so the first one is, how do you think Ixtal landed compared to other cash-out trades? So I've played a good amount of Ixtal, and I think, here, I'll save you, 10 minutes of me yapping here, but I think my answer is I would give it an 8 out of 10. That's my rating for Ixtal. I don't think it's like the best thing we've ever done as far as cash-out trades goes. I think it's not like incredibly innovative in anything like that, but I think it's really solid, and I think the fact that it allows you to play it in a lot of different ways is really cool. Basically, I love the fact that you can play it as a win streak trait a little bit. You can play it as a loss streak trait. You can kind of switch between them. I love that some of the missions are pretty high risk, like the alternate win and loss for 4 rounds early is pretty fun to try to achieve. Has some of that high risk that feels pretty good. I don't think we got balanced all of the missions properly equally, right? Like how often were you really rolling 8 times in stage 2, or how often were you playing a 3-star Kiana? The answer is not very often. Things like that. I think when we launched the 550, like I said, you can nitpick little details, right? Like when we launched, the 550 rewards weren't perfect. They ended up being too good, stuff like that. But I think actually my biggest criticism of Ixtal is actually Brock. I kind of wish Brock didn't exist. And I know you're thinking, you're like, well, wait, Brock's really fun and he's really cool. And that's true. But I think Brock kind of took the spotlight from a lot of the normal cash out experience. It's like we could have had this really cool, moment where you get a bunch of artifacts and radiant items and transition and play around Silas, or not Silas, or could have been Silas, but Milio and things like that. And that could have been cool. But instead, it really just feels like the Brock comp. Did you get Brock, yes or no? And that's kind of it. And then Brock also ended up in a weird space. I don't know. I felt like we, and by we I mean me included, didn't take the right lessons from Piltover in set 9, where it was like the T-Hex really took the spotlight there. I think trying to have a cash out trait tied to a specific unit just ended up kind of being a miss and muddying the waters of what could have been just a really solid cash out trait that allowed you to pivot into a variety of things. I also think one of the other big misses is that when we launched, we almost messed this up. There was a last minute save that kind of saved this, but we only had a 1 cost, a 2 cost, and a 3 cost exactly for you to play the trait, meaning it's actually pretty hard to get into an Ixtal game. I think having one more champion in that 1, 2, or 3 cost pool to make it so that you could play Ixtal a little more often would have been a good thing. I think adding the augment at the last minute saved us a little bit and gave us the opportunity to have players play Ixtal more often, which is good. But yeah, I think all of that said, like I said, I'm being critical here because that's what you guys are asking for. But all of that being said, I think overall it's a fun experience. I think the cash outs are good. I think the variety is good. It felt like an evolution of Fortune. Now, that being said, it's interesting because I would definitely give the most credit to Fortune and Mercenary for innovating the original idea of the cash out trait. But if you tried to launch Fortune today, I think it's boring, right? I think it's just you lost streak, that's it. And if you're on a 6 loss streak and somebody griefs you, that's it. Your run's done, right? Whereas at least with Ixtal, it's hey, I picked a mission and I didn't quite cash it out, but 1 turn delay, I can still try to make this come back. I can still try to make this work. I also liked, there were some fun optimizations players did that I think was healthy. For example, okay, I get to lose 4 in a row, so then while I lose 4 in a row, I'm saving up as much gold as I can, so that after that, the next mission I get is the buy XP, and I buy 68 XP in 1 turn, and that gives me a bunch of points. All of that stuff's really fun, so I don't know. Overall, I think there were some minor misses, and if we were to, let's say, relaunch this or reprint this in a different set, I think we could get the different missions balanced slightly better or things like that. But overall, that's why to me I think it's a win, and it would definitely be in the A tier of cash out traits for sure, right? I think it's better than Draconic. It's better than I think even better than Chemtech, stuff like that. So I don't know. Overall, I've been having fun with it. Every game I get to play an Ixtal game is really exciting, and when you hit it, it feels really good. I do think right now sometimes Brock is actually a little underpowered right now. Brock 1 especially. It feels like you reach this 500 cash out, which you worked really hard for, and then you kind of just get stomped by a random bilge board. That feels pretty bad. So there's other things outside of Ixtal that are affecting Ixtal that make it feel not quite as fun. But it also goes to show you how important it is to get all the connecting pieces right? Because even if your design for a cash out trait is really good, doesn't matter if something else just makes it an unfun experience sometimes. So yeah, overall I think those would be my biggest reads on Ixtal. But would I reprint Ixtal again? I think I would, right? I don't, like I said, I think there's a lot of positives from this that I think are big wins. And so overall, I think I would definitely be pretty happy with it. So yeah, 8 out of 10, happy with Ixtal. But the other thing I'll say here is really it's up to you guys, right? What do you guys think? You tell me, right? I'm the dev, I have my opinions, but I shouldn't, who cares what I think? I want to know what you think, right? Do you guys like Ixtal? What do you like about it? What do you don't? Because hearing some of your feedback, who knows? Maybe there's a slight +1 we can do so that when and if we ever revisit this, we can make it even better, to get it to that 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. So that'd be my thoughts. But there you go. Ixtal, pretty good. All right, next question. Okay, this one I'm kind of cheating because it's 2 questions that are kind of linked, okay? The first question is, we're kind of reaching a ceiling of innovation according to this player. A ceiling of innovation, meaning that it's becoming really hard to innovate because it's how many different times can you print Misfortune? She only has so many skills, you can only do it so many different ways. And, we've been around for a long time. We're running out of ideas, right? There's only so much we can do here. Would you consider disrupting or changing core rules to find new spaces to innovate? This could be something like changing how econ works or whatever. Would you consider changing any of that? That's the question, okay? Now, my answer to the question is somebody else asked a different question. They're hey, if you had, when you talked about double up in a recent Walk the Dog, you mentioned the phrase, if I had infinite time and resources, here's what I would do. I like that phrase. So if you had infinite time and resources, what would you do in the main game of TFT? And the reason I'm linking these two questions is because would I consider changing core systems? I would. I would. And if I had infinite time and resources, what would I do? I would be doing a lot of R&D and thought and like scientific discovery method on the core systems of TFT, because I believe that is where there is the most space for innovation in the game. A lot of the core systems in TFT have been there since day one, right? The best example of this is just how gold works, right? Like gold has been the same since day one. Every 10 gold, 1 econ, you get 1 for winning. We've made slight changes to like streaking and how valuable that is. But generally, econ is a system that hasn't changed in 6 years. We launched with it, and it works for us. But could it be better? Maybe. The other thing is right now, I would call it a very solved system, right? Players who know how to optimize econ and know how to play around econ, they're like, that is a skill set that is defined and is probably not getting any better, right? Like there's no more depth to the econ system. And so that's a thing where it's like, we should spend some time challenging that assumption, right? What does the game look like if you adjust that econ system? What does the game look like if you remove that econ system? And I'm not actually suggesting we remove the econ system. I think that's a silly idea. But I can also tell you, other than hyper roll, we've never really tested that, right? And so because TFT has been this game that's been constantly going and going and going, right? We have to like ship the next set, ship the next set. There hasn't been a ton of time to really stop and do research into these core systems. And I think that's important because a lot of these core systems, when challenged, can lead to the biggest innovations. And I can give you a really easy example here. For 15 sets, every single set basically had the same number of champions, right? We launched TFT with like 55 champions. Over time, we would add +1 or -1 to any individual pool, getting us up to 60. But like for 15 sets, there were 8 5 costs, right? For 15 sets, there were either 11 or 12 4 costs, right? Like nothing changed. That was always the same. But we finally took the time to challenge that system and we went, okay, well, what if there were just a lot more? And we figured out a system to make that work. And I think that led to some really, really good results, right? Like set 16 has been very positive, and I think that led to some really great innovation in the auto battler space, which has been good. So I think it's important for us to find ways to innovate. The challenge, though, is again, I go back to like the time and the development pressure, right? And I'll give you an example. During set 14, we were trying to come up with a set mechanic, and I take responsibility for this one because it was my fault. We had a set mechanic that we had like as an okay idea, and we thought it was actually an improvement to an existing system. I can't really go into it, but we took that to player labs about 5 months into our 1-year development process for set 14. And what happened was the player lab results were atrocious. They were very bad. Players were like, this is awful. I don't like it. It's confusing. I just don't want any part of it. And, looking at those player lab results, there were things we could have changed and things that were off about the design. But the reality is it was like, look, we're 5 months into our year development. We can't ship a set mechanic that had this bad of results in a player labs. So we need a new one. And then we eventually ended up at Hacks, which is what shipped with set 14. But I think, even just trying to make it that little innovation that we did for that mechanic cost us a lot of time, right? And so what ends up happening is you feel like you wasted, I use wasted in air quotes, but it feels like you wasted time because it didn't go anywhere, even though we learned some pretty important lessons from that internally about like how that system works and things like that. And sorry, I'm being vague. But that can be tough in a production timeline when it's just like, wait, we have to start the mechanic over again? What are we doing, right? This is going to be painful. So there just really hasn't been the time to do a lot of the deep explorations on our core systems. So to answer the original questions, am I open to changing core systems? Yes, I think those lead to the biggest innovations, set 16 being a prime example. And if I had infinite time and resources, what would I do? I would try to challenge these core resources and really take the scientific approach and like really do some play tests of like, what's the game like without gold? What's the game like when you change how the shop works or whatever, right? Like there are so many core systems that you could really beat up and try that, man, that would just be like a full-time job right there. But it'd be a really exciting full-time job. So yeah, that's kind of my answer. All right, next question. Why aren't support items a thing? Couldn't they just be artifacts? So this is an interesting one because support items, I think, served their purpose for a while. They were a fun, like, you know, originally in the core item system, we had things like Zeeks and Zephyr, but it was kind of weird, and it felt like one of the biggest barriers to TFT, which is like, well, wait, some items are good on your carries, some items you don't want to put on your carries. That's a little weird. So we unified the system where it's like the core items are always good on your carry, and support items were the separate thing that you could get. But what we found was that basically, the way I can explain it is the more we add to the game, the less design space there is for something else. And so, you know, this is something that my boss has been pushing correctly to the team, which is like, we really need to be careful when we add something to the game, because it means there's no longer, like, A, it'll stop being novel after a while, and B, that's design space that we can't use somewhere else. So in the case of support items, if every time we had an idea for something that would like buff an ally, your immediate reaction was, well, that should be a support item. It also made artifacts feel less special, right? Like, what's the difference between an artifact and a support item? Or a common thing that would happen is, well, support items exist, and then you would try to make an item trait, like, say, Exotech, and it's like, well, what do the items do? Well, they're basically just artifacts and support items. So that means we can't do that. Whereas now, if we want to make an item trait, we can make them feel like support items, and that's a space that's now been brought back. I think actually an interesting example of this is something like, you know, Skarner and Tarek, right, who have auras that provide your team buffs. Now, can you have auras and support items? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, if you wanted to make like a support champion that provides a Zeeks-like effect, that's a lot less interesting when Zeeks is in the set, you know? And so it basically eats up design space that we can do other cool things with. And we think there are cooler things to do with buffing allies or even a Zephyr-like effect than just slapping them on another type of item that we already have. And there were other common things. Like, for example, if you look at the augment selections, right? We had Portable Forge, which gives you a random artifact, or an artifact anvil. And then we had the augment that gave you a random support item, because they were basically power budgeted the same. And the pick rate between them was basically like 1/20th. Like, people love making their carry stronger. People really didn't love support items. Now, I know what you're thinking. For all the Leducs out there in the world and other people are like, wait, I love support items. That's crazy. Yes, there's always somebody out there. But again, the ratio of people who loved artifacts to the ratio of people who love support items was pretty low. And so I think it's up to us as designers to go, okay, if people aren't really loving support items, but we still really like the design space of buffing allies through supportive outputs, is there a cooler place we can put those supportive outputs in the game that get us a more positive experience than support items? I think the answer to that question is yes. I think there's a lot of ways, right? And I think using them on aura champions is a great example of this. I think having supportive-like champions that you can provide to do that, especially with an expanded roster of 100 champions, is a great place to do that. So, yeah, so all of this is to say that could support items be artifacts? Yeah, sure. I just think there's better places for us to put those outputs, and I think in the future we'll continue to explore those, and we can do that because we've removed support items. And so I think that was an important thing for us to do, is remove those support items so we can buy back that experience. So, cool. All right, I have one more question written out here. How do you feel threats landed? And not explicitly just Targon units, but really the like Skarners of the world, the Nidalees of the world, the champions that don't necessarily have traits. How do you think they landed? So I think you could go down the list of each specific champion and talk about like why they worked and why they didn't, right? Like, did Aphelios really work? Are people throwing in Aphelios into their comp just to get armor shred? And it's like, yeah, maybe for a round or two in stage 2, but it's certainly not keeping them on the late game, right? And it's like, was Aphelios really strong enough as an early threat to warrant playing over Jhin with Ginsu's? No, right? So like you could argue that like Aphelios was a failure because he's like not quite strong enough or balanced right or whatever. Sure, you could make that argument. Zoe, same thing, right? Are people playing Zoe for chill? Is Zoe doing enough damage? The person who asked the question actually listed the example of Diana, which is like Diana was really strong, but was she really flexible? No. And so is that okay? But all of this is to say that, like I said, you can nitpick in each individual one and talk about like what's working or not working with each of them. But here's my high-level takeaway that's maybe controversial. I hope not, but maybe it is that sometimes champions without traits open up interesting options to the team building beyond what you're used to. And I think that has been a major success. And I think finding more ways to do that is good, right? And to me, the quintessential example of good here, again, ignoring his exact spell, I think is Taric, right? Like having a champion like Taric who exists that you can just grab as a frontliner when you need him, throw him in your comp, he's very powerful, and you're happy with that, does good things to team building. He also provides an aura that you're like, ooh, if I'm up against some AP comps, Taric is really good. Now, is there some muddying there about his identity? It's like, ooh, do you throw in Taric for the aura or do you throw in Taric to be the main tank? Why not both, But overall, the concept of threat-like units, I think, has been positive. And I think the other one you have to talk about, even though they're technically not threats because they have classes, I think champions like Fiddlesticks and Shyvana have been incredibly successful. I think Fiddlesticks in particular to me is like, you don't really play a Vanquisher line. There's no such thing as like a vertical Vanquisher line, really. There lightly is, right? I know Gangplank exists, yada yada, but you'll still play Fiddlesticks in a lot more compositions because that minus armor and MR aura is valuable, the CC is valuable, and that's a good thing, right? And so I believe the future of TFT has a lot more of that. And when we compare that to things like set 14 and 15, which were much more rigid, given that every champion had traits and sort of that traits sort of said, play me here in this exact line, I think that's been a really big positive for the set. And so kind of like the first question, right, where it's like, how did Ixtal land? And you can talk about specific details and be like, well, that wasn't right, and that wasn't right. And there's an interesting like overall comment here about analysis of game results, right, as well, where it's like, if something has 9 positives and 1 negative, is that negative worth beating up and arguing about? Or like you take those 9 positives and go, we'll do better next time, So all of that is to say that I believe adding threats to TFT a lot more. Again, this is also something that I'd been wanting to do for a long time. If you've watched, my streams when I was streaming or anything like that, I think I'd always kind of alluded to like, oh yeah, threats will be back, but like, you guys have no idea how long I've been wanting them to be back because I think, the original Rammus and Morgana did really positive things to the set. And Taric to me feels a lot like Rammus. Even Fiddlesticks feels a little bit like Rammus. Where it's just like these champions that you can put in and be really, really happy and build around them. It creates more flavor on team building. I think that's been positive. I think once Skarner got buffed, like the first patch Skarner, no one really played him, but the second patch, people were really using Skarner, and that was a good thing, and they were even, building the gargoyle just to get that Skarner out. Now, Skarner's another example where it's like, is his unlock condition correct? Probably not. We probably could have come up with a better unlock condition than having to build one item specifically that you may or may not want to build. But the concept of a Skarner-like champion in a set, very, very positive on. So all of this is that, and again, the other thing I'll call out here is I might be biased because as I kind of just said, I have been wanting threats in TFT for a long time. I think they do very good things to TFT and team building. And so far from what I've played, I feel like that's definitely true. I feel like I have seen really positive results. But much like the Ixtal question, I would throw it back to you guys. What do you guys think? And again, I would ask that as you think about, how have threats landed, try to separate their current balance and power from the design, right? And so, if I'm being overly critical here, it's like, well, do 2 cost threats really need to exist? Maybe not, right? Because maybe Aphelios in particular being a 2 cost, you'll never feel like you put him on a late game board, and because of that, his value would have to be too high, which warps the early game. So like 2 cost threats, maybe just a giant miss. But like, and Zoe's an example where like it's not necessarily that Zoe is a bad design, but Zoe's just been weak for a lot of the time. She's been too hard to play, and the effect she provides doesn't spread out quick enough. So like you can nitpick each one, but that's separate from, are threats good for the game? And so again, what do you guys think? Let me know, because at least for me right now, my hope is that we will find more places for threats in the future, and they will continue to be a kind of a staple of TFT. But going back to the original point that my boss made is like, but the longer we keep them, the less novel they become, and so maybe they need to come and go, and so we'll figure it out. But yeah. All right, cool. Like I said, this is the first video at Riot. Hopefully soon I will have guests. I'm actually hoping later today one of my guests shows up and I can record tomorrow's video with a guest. But that being said, if you guys have particular guests you want me to seek out, you're like, hey, I'd really love to hear from this person, let me know. And also, if you have any specific questions you'd want me to ask other people from other departments or other divisions or things like that, let me know, and I'm happy to try to ask them here while I'm here at Riot for 2 weeks and try to get some of those questions. So, cool. All right, that's going to do it for me. Happy Wednesday. I'm excited for patch day tomorrow. I'm going to try to come in early and play some games before work. I'm excited to get back into it. So, all right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.